There is nothing sinister about left-wing or right-wing donors or activists trying to influence you towards their way of thinking. That's just politics. Get over it or get in the game. Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics, and you're watching the weekly Base Politics show. Welcome back. If you enjoy these episodes, don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, head over to iTunes, leave a review, tell a friend about it. All of that helps us spread the word about the important issues we're discussing here every week. This week, by popular demand, and I do mean people have been banging down my metaphorical door via DMs, we are talking about Project 2025. I heard you. I am a little bit taken aback by the speed at which Project 2025 seems to have entered the national conscious. So we're going to talk about any and everything, why that's happening, what it actually says, should you be concerned, what's good, what's bad. We're going to dig into it together. I haven't seen anything like this, to be totally honest, since when I was first getting involved in politics and I was working around more Republican grassroots groups. There was something called Agenda 2021 that occupied the majority of people's every waking thought, it seemed, for a period of years. And Agenda 2021, while real, it was a real document. It was something that I think had been established at the UN. It was nowhere near the level of threat that they perceived it to be, and yet they acted like it was this doomsday thing hanging over their heads that they had to stop at all costs. I'm getting the exact same vibe from the left right now about Project 2025, and I had not heard a thing about it until I posted my video that went viral about the Chevron deference being overturned. And in the comment section, I had so many liberals weighing in. I don't like to call them liberals because liberals are really more libertarians in this country, right? The left is no longer liberal. They are progressive, i.e. they have pretty socialist, Marxist ideas, which are in contrast to liberalism. But anyways, that's a whole other tangent. They were flipping out in my comment section about Project 2025 and how getting rid of Chevron deference was going to enable this set of ideas to take off. Now, obviously, I work in public policy. I work with a lot of think tanks in DC. I'm pretty in the conversation for a lot of these groups. I had not heard of Project 2025. So I started digging in. It quickly became apparent that it was something the Heritage Foundation was pushing. That's pretty par for the course. The Heritage Foundation is a very, very large and very well-funded think tank in DC, and they have had a lot of clout with rank-and-file Republicans since the Reagan era. Now I'll get more into my views on the Heritage Foundation as we proceed, but what I thought was interesting about this is that these kinds of documents are what we typically sort of consider more along the lines of white paper. It's something that we often mock in political circles because every think tank in DC is constantly sitting in a room, their staff are talking to one another, they're figuring out, based on their research, based on their ideology, what policy proposals would they like to see, and then they put forth what's known as a white paper detailing what that is and why we need action on it, and that often gets disseminated to members of Congress, to their staffs, to the grassroots, to their donors. Project 2025 is very in line with a traditional white paper, okay? And the reason I say we often mock them is because they're not all that efficient. Having a bunch of wonks and academics and people who are obsessed with politics, who are mostly completely removed from everyday American life, sitting in their ivory tower think tanks in DC and coming up with a wish list of what they wish to see happen that's just par for the course. That is the bulk of what these people do. They waste a ton of money doing this because, again, it's not very efficient. And so we poke fun at it because they often have this very aggrandized idea of themselves. They often feel like they really did something when they release a white paper. And to all the normal people around this system, it's just kind of laughable because the average American is not reading white papers, and is pretty much completely has no bearing on how they think about matters of public policy. And the same is mostly true for politicians. A conservative think tank coming in and telling you what they wish you would do. You might sit down and have a meeting with them to some degree or another based on how aligned you are with that think tank or how friendly you are with them or how much they've donated to you, which technically nonprofits cannot donate to political campaigns at all, but some of them do have PACs or 501c4s that open that up. Anyways, that can impact how much a lawmaker listens to them. But there is nothing like different or unique or outside the bounds of normalcy about Project 2025. I just want to clear the air and establish that first and foremost. So now you might be asking yourself, Hannah, if this kind of thing happens all the time, why are we hearing so much about Project 2025 all of a sudden? And that's the question you should be asking yourself, because there's a reason this has entered your consciousness. There's a reason that Project 2025 is being discussed online versus the plethora of other white papers and similar books or pieces of information are getting into your purview. And that reason has to do with the fact that the left has identified it as a handy document in which to fearmonger people about to try to help their case this year. Clearly, there's not been a lot going in Biden's favor lately. And so stumbling upon Project 2025, I feel pretty sure was this giant pot of gold for a lot of people who are working around him, because parts of it are, frankly, completely unhinged. And they realized very quickly that they could ramp up hysteria around it and get people really riled up. And it's worked. I want you to watch just one TikTok that I've seen amongst literally hundreds that are working to do that.
We need to talk about Project 2025.
He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, no, other than day one.
Created by Trump's longtime allies at the Heritage Foundation, along with more than 100 other conservative groups, a 920-page document outlines conservatives' plan to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left. It means that if Trump is elected, the GOP would attempt to implement overreaching bills like the ones popping up in Florida, Texas, Alabama, and other red states federally. The document says the GOP will reach its goals by using presidential power to bypass Congress and by destroying what they call the administrative state, which refers to the agencies that try to ensure clean and safe air, food, water, drugs, and consumer products, and that also hold big corporations back from making more money. So that's what Trump means by day one. He plans to fire and replace tens of thousands of government employees who don't agree with him to elevate his power. And yes, he can do that.
First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively.
All right, let's dive into this document. When I searched the term sex, 133 matches came up. That's obsessive. It explicitly states their goal to rescind regulations prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. So queer people could legally be fired, not hired, refused service, or otherwise discriminated against. It also proposes deleting the term sexual orientation, DEI, gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, and reproductive rights from every piece of legislation that exists. That's terrifying because it promotes discrimination against LGBTQIA+ and pregnant people. And speaking of pregnant people, it also proposes pushing as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America, aka a national abortion ban. They plan to go after education too, just like they have in red states. The authors propose eliminating the entire Department of Education, which they say injects racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. As part of its economic policy, it wants to eliminate regulatory and procedural barriers for companies and prop up the oil industry, which it says is not an environmental problem. This is all just the tip of the iceberg. It's a document filled with endless contradictions, going back and forth between ideas of big government and small, going after monopolies but reducing corporate taxes and regulation, saying they're for freedom but policing people's bodies, gender, and sexuality. And it's a document created by the Heritage Foundation, which has ties to fossil fuel billionaire Charles Koch and is swirling with controversies. Throughout, they dehumanize the left in ways that make me afraid of how much more emboldened far-right Republicans will feel to target vulnerable people.
Dun dun dum. If there's a Republican president, breaking news, Republicans are going to try to influence he or she in order to get their wish list of public policies. Be so serious. The tone of this entire video is absolutely ridiculous, and it has a ton of falsehoods in it, by the way, and it drives me nuts because I see this kind of content creation all the time, and it's very well produced. It's very easy to watch. It tries to come across as if it's nonpartisan, non-biased. It's just here to inform you. And the best part is that they always make sure to mention the Koch brothers, but meanwhile, they never mention who's funding them, right? That's the funny part. They're like, dark money on the other side, Koch billionaire, think tanks meant to influence how you think. And then they're the exact same thing. Now this media is a Democrat-funded media operation that is meant to influence you towards Democratic ideas. They are also funded by left-wing elites and billionaires and other left-wing donors who are interested in funding that cause. They are literally a think tank pushing out propaganda, trying to freak you out about the same thing happening on the right. There is nothing sinister about left-wing or right-wing donors or activists trying to influence you towards their way of thinking. That's just politics. Get over it or get in the game. According to the Now This Media Wikipedia, it's an American progressive social media-focused news organization founded in 2012. The company is specialized in creating short-form videos. Their target audience is millennials and Gen Z. It was founded by Huffington Post co-founder and former chairman Kenneth Lehrer and former Huffington Post CEO Eric Hippew. Sorry if I butchered those names. Now This originally focused exclusively on social media platforms such as Facebook, having announced in 2015 that it would not have a homepage. By 2018, it had changed this position. On December 6th of 2015, Now This raised $16.2 million in Series D funding. By this time, the company said that 68% of its audience were millennials between the ages of 18 and 34. It was announced that this funding would be used to launch more focused channels. I'll link that in the show notes. You're free to read more. But the point is that anybody that is taking time to create this kind of content is going to have money behind it in one of two ways, right? They are either being funded by donors or investors, or they are making enough money off their social media content to reinvest it and pay for the production. Like, you have to be daft to think that anything like this that you consume is not politically motivated in one degree or another. And that's totally fine, as long as you, the consumer, have wisdom and judgment and actually look and see if what they say is correct. Look for sources that are on the opposite side of it and make sure you're getting both sides of the coin. There are things you can do to help make sure that you're not just being fed propaganda and regurgitating it. But unfortunately, too few people are doing that these days. And that's why we at Base Politics are always super upfront about who we are and what we believe and what our agenda is, because I can't stand all of this, like, we're not biased. Everybody's biased. You wouldn't be working in public policy, in politics in general, if you weren't biased, if you didn't have an agenda. That's just such like snaky seed oil behavior to pretend like you don't. No, here at Base, we believe in free market capitalism. We believe in individual liberty. We believe that the government must be limited in order for those two things to exist. And that is what we are always working to push. We are not partisan. We are not aligned with any politicians. We are solely based on those principles, and we're open about it. So for those of you who have DM'd me, I'm glad you came to me, because obviously you want to hear about Project 2025 from that kind of lens. And that's what we're going to do today. So first, let's dig into the website. Let's go to the horse's mouth itself. I am doing this for the first time alongside you today. When you get there, you can see this is a very well-designed site. Again, pretty well funded. It says building now for conservative victory through policy, personnel, and training. And they go on to say it is not enough for conservatives to win elections. If we are going to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left, we need both a governing agenda and the right people in place, ready to carry this agenda out on day one of the next conservative administration. This is the goal of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. The project will build on 4 pillars that will collectively pave the way for an effective conservative administration. And as you can see, it is backed by the Heritage Foundation. What I think is crazy town is that the girl in the Now This video tries to tie the Heritage Foundation to the Koch brothers, which I'm sure at some point in time, the Kochs have given some money to the Heritage Foundation. Most of those kinds of donations are not actually public knowledge, because 501c3s do not have to release their donor information. And that's because crazy people on both the left and right will try to then dox their donors, harass them, stalk them, cancel them, and God knows what else, maybe even actually physically endanger them. So one, Now This Media has no clue how much money the Kochs have actually given the Heritage Foundation. But anybody with even just like a tepid understanding of DC and the various sort of groups that are lining up along the right knows that the Heritage Foundation mostly stands in contrast, at least nowadays, to the vast majority of the institutions that the Koch brothers have created and give the vast majority of their money to. The Koch brothers have an entire apparatus called Stand Together that does incredible work. And there's all kinds of little branches underneath it, like Americans for Prosperity. There's groups that work solely on Hispanic outreach. There's groups that work solely on stopping the military-industrial complex. I cannot understand the left's hyperfixation with the Koch brothers, okay? I honestly find it like laughable at this point. Like, I genuinely think you're not very smart if you're on the left and you think the Koch brothers are your enemy. Like, be so serious. You are so far removed from the actual like players in DC and who's behind what, it's ridiculous. Like they're always like, the Koch brothers. And like half the time it's not the Koch brothers at all. And actually, if you dig into the things the Koch brothers truly fund, what their passions actually are, most people on the left would like them. That's the hilarious part. The Koch brothers have been like at the forefront of criminal justice reform way before even many people on the left were there. They've been at the forefront of guarding immigrants and standing up for immigrants in the entire political apparatus for decades and decades and decades. They do so much good in the world. I honestly think that you have to be completely uneducated to not like them, because they're truly over here in the middle with most libertarians. They are libertarians. They are not Republicans. In fact, they pretty much pulled out of GOP politics after the nomination of Trump in 2016 and instead mostly focused on issue advocacy. The only time that they've like weighed in at the national level was when they tried to stop Trump over the past couple of months and backed Nikki Haley, which they also got a lot of criticism from the libertarian camp on that because she was very pro-war. Anyways, the idea that this is some like sinister Koch-funded agenda is stupid. It's so stupid. Okay, I've scrolled through the list. I have it pulled up right here. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Of the like 100 plus groups that have signed on as coalition partners to Project 2025, these are not predominantly Koch organizations. They might be organizations that at some point the Kochs have given money to, but none of their actual operations are on this list. So I was trying to figure out why they would even make this kind of a bold claim. And basically, according to SourceWatch, this seems to be what they're pulling from, the Heritage Foundation has received funding from Donors Trust and Donors Capital Funds. The Koch brothers have donated millions of dollars to Donors Trust through the Knowledge and Progress Fund and possibly other vehicles. So that doesn't mean that they gave money to Heritage, okay? That means that Donors Trust has given money to Heritage and that Koch gives money to Donors Trust. But Donors Trust is an organization I know well. I know people who work there. And basically what it is sort of a like hedge fund management company for donors. So you give them a bulk of your dollars and you tell them the things that you care about, the things you're passionate about, and they then help you identify groups and causes that would make sense for you to donate to. Okay, so that doesn't mean that just because they gave money to Donors Trust that money went to Heritage. Again, these people don't even do like the surface level of research before they pop off on the internet and spread tons of fake information. And I just think it's so funny that the left's always over here like disinformation, so concerning, but they never have anything to say about the massive piles of garbage the mainstream media and their organizations put out into the universe day in and day out. For those who are not in the know, the Heritage Foundation has always been right of center, okay? They have always been far more conservative on, say, social issues. But up until the past couple of years, up until the like MAGA nationalist infiltration of the Republican Party, Heritage was more just like rank and file conservative. They weren't libertarian, but they genuinely seemed to revolve predominantly around issues that at the very least were mostly oriented in free market capitalism, individual liberty, and especially limiting the government. Now, obviously, they would get a little anti-individual liberty with some of their social policies because social conservatism is in direct contrast to many of the things in the Bill of Rights and true individual liberty. But other than that, they were decently solid, right? Groups like the Kochs groups or other organizations I would work with would often partner with Heritage to get things done. But in 2016, they began to massively shift to the right on economics too. And because of that, they've had a ton of turnover. Like I heard through the pipeline that a ton of people have actually quit their like tech sector because they've become so anti-capitalist within it. And they're pushing a lot of regulation and just like plain old anti-free speech stuff when it comes to internet policy. And so they've had a lot of turnover. And also they pushed out the lady who had been doing a really good job leading them for some time. Her name was Kay Cole James. She was awesome, right? She too was like further right than me, but I truly respected her. I really appreciated her perspective. She got pushed out of the Heritage Foundation for a pretty corrupt reason in my book, which is that she began to speak out about the systemic racism she herself had faced in this country as a Black woman during the summer of like the BLM riots and that whole conversation around systemic racism. And a lot of people at Heritage and their donors simply did not want to hear it. And so they pushed her out and they brought in this guy, Kevin Roberts, who's now running it. He had formerly been with the Texas Public Policy Center, and he's a pretty far-right nationalist, okay? I don't like Kevin Roberts. Most people in my camp don't like him, don't like what's happening to the Heritage Foundation under him. But this Project 25 under his leadership now, and just given the trajectory that we've seen at the Heritage Foundation for the past few years, it's totally in line, okay? I honestly have wondered often how much donors truly pay attention to the places they're giving their money. Because if you were somebody who was donating to them 20 years ago and now you're still with them, like either your values shifted drastically or you're not paying very close attention because they have become completely unmoored from the very basic principles that have typically governed conservatism, even though they are still calling themselves conservatives. And I think that that reflects the coalition they put together here, which again is just par for the course. When you come out with this kind of, dream list of policy issues you're trying to push, when you want politicians to take you seriously, you often go to others in your movement who are aligned with you and try to get them to sign on as coalition partners. And if you scroll through this list, you'll see it's a lot of organizations that are pretty far right. It's not a lot of the status quo that's been around DC for a long time. There's a few of those on there. And I assume some of the ones like Competitive Enterprise Institute or Foundation for Government Accountability, I assume those groups probably only signed on to like a portion of this agenda and not all of it, because the scope of Project 2025 is pretty far outside the bounds of what a lot of these groups work on. And a lot of these groups are more liberty leaning, and I just can't picture them co-signing this entire agenda, but they don't really distinguish that on their website. So it's hard to say for sure. But mostly you're going to see groups that have sprung up to support Trump or that have moved pretty nationalist far right in the past couple of years anyways. You've got groups like Center for Immigration Studies on here, the Claremont Institute, which is totally trash. You've got the Family Policy Alliance, the Family Research Council, both pretty far right groups working to like pretty much create a theocracy in the country. So yeah, nothing all that strange here. Groups I certainly don't want to work with or associate with, but the fact that these groups think along the lines of what's in this document should not really be surprising to anybody. As a whole, before digging into what's actually in Project 2025, I just want to say all this to say, we've got to stop with the conspiracy theory stuff, okay? I don't like a lot of what I'm about to tell you, but at the end of the day, this is not some sinister plan. This is not something unique to the right, and it doesn't mean just because this exists that these people are going to get their way, even though some of them do have close associations with Trump. Obviously, the groups that have signed on here, they are going to work to try to lobby both Trump, people in the Trump administration, if he does get elected, and other politicians down ballot in order to get the things they want to see enacted. This is just how nonprofit lobbying goes. Like I mentioned, you can't actually donate to politicians. And so the only way you can influence them is to try to build large coalitions, try to get grassroots really active, try to put forth sort of aspirational policy ideas and lobby them with public pressure to try to get them to do what you want. Clearly, these groups that are signed on here would have more sway over people in a Trump administration, just like things like Black Lives Matter and their wish list of policy ideas would have more sway over a Biden administration. Anyways, as you continue through their website, you can see that Project 2025 is actually a full book, and I did not have time to fully read it. So I have worked to research the highlights and lowlights of what's in it. But listen, as I said, always go to the horse's mouth. If you have the time, go ahead and read it. You can click on the website. You can work through the different areas it addresses. I think it is always good to do your own research. I'm going to do my best to summarize for you, but there may be things I miss, so feel free to dig in. I think the dominant aim of this project seems to be in preparing the grassroots to come and advocate for themselves in the next administration. And it also seems to be working on the website to collect like a LinkedIn kind of appointees for a new administration that they could train, which is, again, not like totally outside the bounds of normal operations in DC. Anytime there's a new administration coming in, all of the groups that feel they might have sway over that administration are trying to get their people put in there, right? It's a sign of prestige. It's a sign of having allies within an administration who will lobby on your behalf, who will do your bidding. So that's pretty normal. This does seem to be kind of a more public-facing operation than usual. Like typically that list of people they're trying to get put into administrations would be internal. And this seems like they're taking applications from the wild, which it kind of made me giggle because can you imagine the people that are applying right now? Like I would pay money to sort through some of those applications. Anyways, what does Project 2025 actually want to do? What is it trying to achieve? What it's trying to train people to do? What's it trying to equip them with when they go and they do try to lobby on their own behalf? That's what I want to dig into. And per usual, guys, there's some good ideas in here, and there's some atrocious ideas in here. Obviously, as I've said on other videos, nationalism is a foil to the ideas and traditions and principles that the vast majority of the right have stood for throughout my lifetime and even before. And obviously, I think I need to do an entire segment on this because just from the comments, it is so depressing the number of people who do not understand the difference in nationalism and in patriotism. And even when I have pointed out that they are different, I still get people in my comments saying, you're wrong. Nationalism is just being proud of your country. No, it's not. Nationalism is a set of public policy principles and ideas that they are trying to get enacted that are anti-capitalist on almost every front, that are anti-individual liberty, and that are very, very big government. And the reason that this document is disjointed, as the TikTok video said, is because there is a war in the GOP right now to see what's going to win out. Is it going to be traditional conservatism that aims to conserve our foundations that were enacted around the values of free market capitalism and limited government and individual liberty? Or are the MAGA nationalists going to win out and overturn that, right? They're still calling themselves conservatives, but the nationalists are not actually trying to conserve anything. They're trying to create a very big government with a ton of power that they can then weaponize to go after their enemies, and that they can then utilize to try to construct a society based on their ideas. So the Project 2025 document sets out 4 main policy aims. It says they want to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life. They want to dismantle the administrative state, defend the nation's sovereignty and borders, and secure God-given individual rights to live freely. This is reporting from the BBC, and they say, led by former Trump administration officials, Project 2025 calls for the sacking of thousands of civil servants, expanding the power of the president, dismantling the Department of Education, sweeping tax cuts, a ban on pornography, halting sales of the abortion pill, and a whole lot more. There is substantial agreement between many parts of the official Republican Party platform and Project 2025, although the think tank document is much more detailed and in some policy areas goes much further than the party line. There is a sharper contrast between the two when it comes to the issue of abortion, with Heritage urging more aggressive anti-abortion policies. Democrats have highlighted Project 2025's most controversial proposals and called the document a blueprint for a second Trump term in office. However, Trump and his campaign have denied or downplayed its influence. With Mr. Biden's age increasingly a key election topic, the party has aimed to refocus their supporters' attention in an effort to mobilize voters against Project 2025, which Mr. Biden recently said would destroy America. In response, Trump has disavowed the document. I know nothing about Project 2025, Trump posted on his social media website, True Social. I have no idea who is behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. I wish I had a better Trump impersonation, guys. I'll work on it. But the team that created the project is chock full of former Trump advisors, including director Paul Dans, who was chief of staff at the Office of Personal Management while Trump was president. Russell Vought, another former Trump administration official, wrote a key chapter in the document and also serves as the RNC's 2024 platform policy director. So yeah, I guess no matter how much Trump denies it, clearly he has a lot of friends that are behind this. And obviously, many of the things that it dictates or at least aims for are things that he supports. So I don't really know. I think just take whatever he says with a giant grain of salt. But what I do think is interesting is that the left is trying to act like the right is just in lockstep with this document. And I don't think that's true. And I don't think you have to look any further than the RNC convention this week, where they voted to adopt a platform that notably was absent of a lot of these ideas and even got rid of some of the anti-gay statements that were formerly in it. Brad covered that on his show. If you want, go check it out. He did a great deep dive into what happened there. And secondarily, a lot of the things in this that the left is freaking out about are not bad. Firing lots of bureaucrat leeches, dismantling the Department of Education, tax cuts, that sounds awesome. Obviously, a lot of stuff I'm about to tell you about does not sound awesome to me, but for any Democrat who is reading this and shuddering, remember, you already advocated for this, guys. Own it. Every single time you fought against limiting the government, every single time you fought against limiting the power of the executive, every single time you melted down over things like Chevron deference that actually restored power to people's elected officials and stripped it from fourth branch agencies and the executive, you asked for it. You advocate for it when you support things like stacking the Supreme Court. You advocate for this possibility when you support things like judicial activism, right? Anytime that you are in favor of giving the federal government more power, and especially the executive, you are setting yourself up for this. At this point, I think you have to be honestly very, very foolish to think that you can advocate giving the people you like expanded powers when they're in office and then being shook, and I do mean shook, when somebody you don't like is in power and that power is then used against you. This is just basic common sense that is so far from being common anymore. You see it with things like Republicans passing bills in Texas and in Florida, giving the government power to dictate to social media companies how they moderate their content. And then they're shocked when they find out things like the Biden administration tried to dictate to social media the ways they could moderate their content. Or you see it with things like the vaccine requirements, right? You had all these people on the left trying to force people to put a vaccine in their body. But then you had far-right nationalist types trying to come in and tell private businesses that they couldn't dictate whether or not they wanted somebody on their property to be vaccinated or wear a mask. It's the same legal precedent. If you give the power to the government to come in and tell people how they can operate when it comes to these personal decisions, you open it up for the other side to do the exact same thing. It's called legal precedent, okay? If you're going to be involved in politics, guys, you've got to learn to think 2 steps ahead. You have to. It is mandatory. It's inexcusable, the number of people who cannot think 2, even 3 steps ahead for the things that they advocate for in the system. You have a responsibility as a U.S. citizen to be educated. That's your duty that you have. And that's because you've been given the amazing gift of actually having a government you can participate in and sway. But it infuriates me how few people take that duty and that responsibility and that gift seriously. Real fast, guys, I have to turn your attention to this Forbes piece I also read that I just thought was really funny. They're talking about the things involved in Project 2025, and they say Project 2025 broadly proposes to insert far more political appointees who are ideologically aligned with the president into the executive branch, replacing many of the nonpartisan career civil servants who serve in it now, proposing an executive order that would put political appointees into any confidential policy-determining, policy-making, or policy-advocating positions, which Trump previously did at the end of his presidency, but Joe Biden then overturned it. This is high-key funny, okay? 1, the fact that they are like waxing poetic about the audacity of a president to appoint people around him who are aligned with them. As if that's not what every single administration has done for all time. As Obama said, elections have consequences. Like, obviously, this is something that would and should happen when administrations turn over. Secondarily, the fact that the left is over here pretending like you just have all these like amazing altruistic experts who are just civil servants dedicating their careers. No. They are leeches. These are people that literally, most of their jobs should not exist. The ones that do exist, they often do a piss poor job at it. They are grossly overpaid. And by the way, they are not this like non-biased civil servant class of people. No, they're Democrats. And that's why Democrats are freaking out about somebody coming in and actually clearing house in the 4th branch of government, because they know that these people are not just like on the sidelines. They're not just like, putting a finger on the scale. No, these people are activists that have infiltrated the government. And I honestly think that's one of the things you should hope to see. Anytime you have a more limited government person that's in office, you would hope to see them cleaning house and getting rid of people with big government ideologies around them. I think this, again, just speaks to the fact that the left does not want to have to win the battles of hearts and minds, right? They fully think they should not have to compete for your support. They fully think that because they have taken over the mainstream media and higher education and most of the government leech jobs that exist, that they've got this thing on lock, even if they do happen to lose here and there. And so the weeping and gnashing of teeth you're experiencing when you see things like Chevron deference get overturned or these kinds of proposals put forth, it has a lot more to do with that than anything else. Now, let's get into a summary of some of the main ideas that are covered in Project 2025. I'm pulling these summaries from a BBC article and Forbes, both of which I will link in my show notes. So the first section has to do with just the structure of government as a whole. And they say Project 2025 proposes that the entire federal bureaucracy, including independent agencies such as the DOJ, be placed under direct presidential control, a controversial idea known as unitary executive theory. In practice, that would streamline decision-making, allowing the president to directly implement policies in a number of areas. The proposals also call for eliminating job protections for thousands of government employees who could then be replaced by political appointees. Womp womp. The document labels the FBI a bloated, arrogant, increasingly lawless organization. It calls for drastic overhauls of this and several other federal agencies, as well as the complete elimination of the Department of Education. Go further. Eliminate the FBI. They are so corrupt. They are so useless. They are such a partisan political organization, and their targeting of the American people for simply exercising their rights over the past couple of years is treasonous. Gut it. They go on to say the Republican Party platform includes a proposal to declassify government records, root out wrongdoers, and fire corrupt employees, pledges to slash regulation and government spending, and also suggests eliminating the Department of Education, but it stops short of proposing a sweeping overhaul of federal agencies as outlined in Project 2025. Again, I have very little problems with the vast majority of stuff in here. The one thing I will say is that while I think most of these things are a good idea, I don't support expanding the power of the executive. I think we need separation of powers. But also, when it comes to the fourth branch of government, the separation of powers mostly do fall under the president. The president has a ton of purview over these agencies, and that's one reason that the agencies need to have a whole lot less power as well. Congress needs to do its job and legislate, and we need to remove the ability for the executive to govern with the pen via these agencies. Additionally, I'll add some of this does seem like it could be very self-serving for Trump, given some of his legal issues he's had within the DOJ. Next up, they tackle immigration, and what's in this should not surprise anybody. Obviously, I'm very pro-immigration. I think immigration is a capitalist issue. I think freedom of movement is a human right. And I, as a whole, think that the right's current stance against immigrants is just so dumb on so many fronts. It's such a waste of resources. It's so economically illiterate. I really think we need to just reform our immigration system and make it much easier to come here legally, work, and pay taxes. This really shouldn't be hard. But the fact is that nationalism is very commingled with a lot of bigotry and racism. And when they attack immigrants, it's coming from a different place than where I think many supporters are, right? Like, I think many supporters genuinely just do feel like their quality of life is decreasing. Their companies are moving overseas. They can't have the same standard of life they feel like they used to or feel like they're entitled to. And so it's very easy to blame immigrants. In reality, immigrants have very, very little to do with most of those political realities. But the nationalists obviously have an easy scapegoat with their supporters and pointing to the immigrants. And again, are also driven, I think, underneath by a very severe dislike of people who look different from them or who think differently from them, who come from different regions. So they say increase funding for a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. One of Trump's signature proposals in 2016 is proposed in the document. Project 2025 also proposes dismantling the Department of Homeland Security and combining it with other immigration enforcement units and other agencies, creating a much larger and more powerful border policing operation. Other proposals include eliminating visa categories for crime and human trafficking victims, increasing fees on immigrants, and allowing fast-track applications for migrants who pay a premium. Not all of those details are repeated in the Republican platform document, but the overall headlines are similar. The party is promising to implement the largest deportation program in American history. Again, none of this is surprising or new. Trump has always been very anti-immigrant. The nationalists and MAGA camps have always been very anti-immigrant. As much as I disagree with them and dislike where I believe a lot of this comes from, I'm not going to get riled up over it. And also, it's not like the left. I hate this notion that the left is just so nice to immigrants and loves immigrants and does such a good job. No, they haven't either. The conditions at the border are gross. I went down a few months ago. Go watch my video if you haven't. Because they also are refusing to play ball with Republicans and actually pass sane, common sense immigration reforms. They're getting people killed. Anyways, let's move on to the climate and economy section. They say the document proposes slashing federal money for research and investment in renewable energy and calls for the next president to stop the war on oil and natural gas. Carbon reduction goals would be replaced by efforts to increase energy production and energy security. That's exactly the right thing to be happening. And listen, I'm in a camp of saying climate change is real. Climate change is something that we should be concerned about. We, as limited government, individual liberty believers, pro-life people, we should be concerned with the state of the world. We should want to take care of the resources around us. Climate change, though, on the left is a Trojan horse vehicle for socialism, and the vast majority of things that they're trying to push have absolutely nothing to do with actually addressing the issues in our climate, wouldn't work even if they did get passed, and as a whole would just serve to make all of us equally poor and have less access to resources that keep people alive, okay? Somebody not having sustainable energy when there is a massive snowstorm in Texas, that gets people killed. Somebody not having access to energy when there's a heat wave in the deep south, that can get people killed. The left has been playing around with people's lives in order to get their socialist agenda through, and I'm sick of it. Oil and gas is not your enemy. Oil and gas is the wrong focal point when it comes to this conversation. There are so many free market solutions we can and should be looking to actually address having cleaner energy, but the left isn't interested in any of that, right? Because that doesn't get them their commie goals. This goes on to say the paper sets out two competing visions on tariffs and is divided on whether the next president should try to boost free trade or raise barriers to imports. And that's because, again, You are seeing an infight of the GOP right now. People who support free trade, people who support capitalism, people who recognize that free trade increases the quality of life for all people, and people who just hate other countries because they fully believe that their citizens are more important than other people's citizens, and they just like have a bone to pick with different countries. And so they have this instinct to be true isolationists, right? Isolationists gets used completely incorrectly when it comes to conversations around war and the military-industrial complex. Most of the people they call isolationists in these discussions are actually just non-interventionists, whereas the nationalists are the true isolationists. They want to isolate us. They want to make everything be built here, be consumed here. And that is a recipe for making all of us poorer, for slowing our economy down, for providing Americans with far fewer options. It's failed every single time it's been attempted, and it's not hard to know that. And for those who are pushing the tariffs on the right, not only is this an anti-capitalist position, not only would it do nothing to actually increase the quality of life in America, it would ultimately be a tax that gets placed on the American people. Companies don't pay tariffs. Other country citizens don't pay tariffs. You pay tariffs. Again, it's not hard to know this. The article goes on to say the economic advisor suggests that a second Trump administration should slash corporate and income taxes, abolish the Federal Reserve, and even consider a return to gold-backed currency. That's hella-based. Absolutely yes, on all three fronts. Having a lower corporate tax. Again, corporations don't pay taxes. You do. That means not only would more corporations choose to have their companies located here, which means more jobs for you, means more innovation, means a higher GDP. It also means you would pay less for the goods and services that they are creating. Lowering the income tax absolutely needs to happen. It is crazy what we are paying in taxes at this point to live in America. And getting rid of the Federal Reserve, which is one of the worst things that ever happened to this country, and that is, at least 90% responsible for the inflation you're currently living with, is a good idea. We have got to get back to an actual gold-based currency. Your money is becoming meaningless because of this scheme. And if you don't know that, go watch my video I did several years ago on how the Federal Reserve has broken our money system. They say on this and many other topics, Project 2025 is more detailed and goes further than the official Republican platform, which talks of bringing down inflation and drilling for oil to reduce energy costs, but is thin on specific policy proposals. All right, let's move on to the hot button topics, abortion and family. Project 2025 does not call outright for a nationwide abortion ban. However, it proposes withdrawing the abortion pill, mifepristone, from the market and using existing but little enforced laws to stop the drug being sent through the post. The document suggests that the Department of Health and Human Services should maintain a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. I just don't know how anybody on the right, like any serious person, can sit here and freak out about Sharia law and the dangers of those kinds of systems and then advocate for a theocracy. I might be a Christian, but Christianity is about free will. Jesus never gave you any command or any right to go use the government to force people into your religion or to make them behave according to its tenets. And if you don't know that, you need to switch churches. You need to find a better pastor, okay? Not only do you have no right constitutionally or biblically to try to do this, it actually is completely counterintuitive. If you want people to meaningfully meet Jesus and form a relationship with him and choose to come into Christianity, then you are taking that possibility away from them by trying to force that on them via the government. As a whole, I think this is such a weak-minded position for anybody to take. I don't need everybody around me to adhere to my religion or believe as I do in order for me to be able to openly practice it. And this is where social conservatives have always lost me. We can talk about the benefits of marriage. We can talk about the benefits of a two-parent household. We can talk about the left's agenda to break down the family and to have people be more reliant on the state. Those are valid conversations to have. But where you lose me is when you want to start using the government to force people into family structures that fit your religion. It's completely un-American. They go on to say, on this issue at least, the document differs fairly substantially from the Republican platform because it's bonkers, which only mentions the word abortion once. The platform says abortion laws should be left to individual states and that late-term abortions, which it does not define, should be banned. It adds that the access to prenatal care, birth control, and in vitro fertilization should be protected. The party platform makes no mention of cracking down on the distribution of mifepristone. And honestly, some of these things, they are a wish list and they are not realistic because the Supreme Court actually just upheld, I'm pretty sure unanimously for all of those who gripe and complain about the conservative justices, they just stood up for the right for people to access this pill. So in order to like block access of it, I'm not sure exactly what channels they could even go through at this point. All right, on to the next section, which is tech and education. And I knew this part was going to piss me off because I hate what is happening on the right under the guise of fighting big tech. This piece says, under the proposals, pornography would be banned and tech and telecom companies that allow access would be shut down. I hate pornography. I think it's disgusting. I think most of the women that are in it are, if not trafficked, very close to being trafficked. I don't think there's a lot of autonomy many of those people have. I do not believe in sex work being criminalized, period. But I also can't stand the push to like advocate for it, normalize it. They're like, sex work is work. No, sex work is atrocious. And I hate that absolutely any woman has ever been in a circumstance where they felt like they had to resort to it. But all these kinds of bans ever do is create black markets. We already have a ban on prostitution. How's that going? Not great. All you do is put these women in more danger. You enable people to profit on the black market. You create more crime around it. This is dumb. What needs to happen around pornography is go out and do the actual work of educating people, of convincing them not to use it. There's plenty of arguments against it. Plenty. But banning it, that's going to do nothing other than create secondary problems. On a higher note, they say the document calls for school choice and parental control over schools and takes aim at what it calls woke propaganda. I love school choice. I'm a huge advocate for school choice. I think one of the only things that can save this country is school choice because, again, the government has a monopoly on schools right now, and they have every incentive to dumb you down. They teach you what to think, not how to think. They have no reason to empower you to actually advocate for yourself or fight back meaningfully. And boy, is it working. And nothing gets better until our population becomes more educated. Nothing. School choice is essential. You cannot throw more money at that problem. You have to break kids out of these failing schools. They go on to say that the document proposes to eliminate a long list of terms from all laws and federal regulations, including sexual orientation, gender equality, abortion, and reproductive rights. Again, I don't really know how you do this because you can't like pass laws to strip all other old laws from these terms. That would just be exhausting work and kind of pointless. Maybe via executive order, you could do something for, a temporary time period. But also, like, what does this even mean? This is just, it's so dumb. It's like they're trying to go after wokeism and it's working because then the woke left is like, oh my gosh, they're going to like keep trans people from working. And like, none of that's really possible. This is ridiculous. Anyways, they go on to say Project 2025 aims to end diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools and government departments as part of what it describes as a wider crackdown on woke ideology. Good. DEI is crap. Diversity is a good, wonderful, and desirable thing. DEI is not about diversity. It's about communism. Strip it. Gut it. Americans want to live in a meritocracy. That has been resoundingly clear for some time. The left has lost on this issue 10 years ago, and they're going to keep digging their own graves, but we're not with them. Meritocracy or bust. They go on to say its proposals are broadly reflected in the Republican platform, which in addition to calling for abolishing the Department of Education, aims to boost school choice and parental control over education and criticizes what the party calls the inappropriate political indoctrination of our children. I love that they're aghast at this. Like, how dare parents want to have some say over the curriculum their kids are being taught that they pay for? So these are some of the topics that the document covers more broadly. I'll get into a few more specific areas that seem to be really triggering some people. They do address transgender rights more specifically in the document. Forbes says transgender rights and gender identity beyond biological sex are roundly rejected in it, with such steps as reinstating the ban on transgender Americans serving in the military, prohibiting public school educators from referring to students by anything other than their birth name and pronouns without parental permission, and ensuring no federal funds are used to provide gender-affirming care. Now, I like and love trans people. I have several people in my life who are trans, and I support some of this. I don't think that trans people should be banned from serving in the military. However, I do think that it's problematic. A lot of people who are trans or who desire to transition have joined the military specifically to access benefits that would pay for those surgeries. American taxpayers should not be paying for those surgeries. Secondarily, this whole push around prohibiting the public educators from referring to students by anything other than their birth name or pronouns without their parents' permission, I am not super opposed to this, okay? I think this falls along the lines of the fact that a lot of people on the left don't want parents to have say over anything that's happening in the schools and have often worked to shield kids who are struggling with identity issues from their parents knowing about it. And you'll hear them say this is like keep kids safe, as if their parents are all just going to like come hang them if they find out. That's not the government school's job, okay? I'm not saying that there's not households who react badly to having a kid who's struggling with these identities, but the government has no business stepping into the middle of that child and parent relationship. And in general, I think school choice handles this just fine. Okay, I think parents need to have the final say over where their kid goes to school, over what the policies are in that school, over what curriculum they want their kid being taught. And that would automatically address many of these issues we're seeing popping up in schools. And I don't have a problem with ensuring no federal funds are used to provide gender-affirming care. I don't think federal funds should be used for anybody's healthcare at all. So, zero problem there. They go on to talk about DEI and LGBTQ rights that are discussed. They say Project 2025 seeks to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs throughout the federal government and in universities. And while it doesn't outlaw same-sex marriage, it supports nuclear families that include a married mother, father, and their children, and calls for restricting laws that bar discrimination on the basis of sex to exclude sexual orientation and gender identity. Again, I have no problem ending DEI programs, specifically those that are taxpayer funded. If you want to have that, host that, attend that, pay for it out of your own money. I don't really know what they mean by supporting nuclear families. To me, that kind of just sounds more like virtue signaling. And furthermore, I just can't envision Congress getting the votes to change discrimination laws, particularly when it comes to gender or sex. Project 2025 also says student loan relief efforts should come to an end, including the public service loan forgiveness program and income-driven repayment plans, as the proposal states borrowers should be expected to repay their loans. Yes, I would take it a step further and say the government should not be in the student loan business at all, because that is the only thing that will bring the cost of college actually down. I've made an entire episode on that. I'll link it as well. Go watch it if you don't know what I'm talking about. This part I hate, obviously, because I'm suing the Biden administration over this, but Project 2025 says TikTok should be banned, and the proposal calls for reforming Section 230. Now, this is one of the worst, most problematic things in the entire document for me, because Section 230, while often vastly misunderstood by people on both the left and right, is literally just the First Amendment for the internet. It just says that you as a business owner cannot be sued for things other people write on your websites. If you got rid of Section 230, you would get rid of not only the vast majority of social media and the way it functions, it would get rid of things like leaving a Yelp review. It would get rid of leaving comments on content. It would get rid of the ability for you to weigh in on news sources and their articles. Private businesses, private companies have a right to free speech. And that means they are free to say what they want, and they're also free to not promote speech they do not want. That is their right. They have a right to moderate their content. And honestly, if you think you would like a world without content moderation, you can go to some of these websites that don't do too much content moderation, and all you're going to find is the underbelly of humanity, because the vast majority of people want to be in a world where they're not seeing violence, where they're not seeing sexual acts, where they're not seeing maliciousness in their news feeds. But the right has been targeting Section 230 in conjunction with progressives like Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar and socialist Lena Khan at the FTC for some time, because they want to be able to police your speech, plain and simple. It's gross, it's disgusting, it's unconstitutional, and this is a line for me. Anybody that's in favor of getting rid of Section 230, done. Get out of here. Project 2025 also calls for a top-to-bottom overhaul of the DOJ and FBI that gets rid of what it calls an unaccountable bureaucratic managerial class and radical left ideologies, proposing an agency that would be more focused on violent crime and filing litigation that's consistent with the president's agenda and filled with far more political appointees. It also proposes prohibiting the FBI from investigating misinformation or making politically motivated moves against U.S. citizens. Honestly, all of this is needed. The DOJ is completely out of control. It's completely politicized, and they do virtually no solving of actual crimes. On the subject of taxes, Project 2025 would seek to get rid of current tax rates and most deductions and credits, instead proposing a 15% rate for anyone under the Social Security wage base of $168,000 and $30,000 for taxpayers earning more than that, which means the lowest income taxpayers will now pay more and some higher earners will pay less, and it would also lower the corporate income tax rate to 18%. As I said, lowering the corporate tax rate is great. I think having a flat tax is also a good idea. It's a more fair system. It's easier to actually identify what you owe. The current tax code is a hot mess. So would I reform the tax code exactly along these lines? Probably not, but this isn't that bad. I love this part. They address the Federal Reserve in this document. The project seeks to reform the Federal Reserve by taking the monetary steering wheel out of its hands and returning it to the people, which the authors propose could be done by getting rid of the government's control over the nation's money entirely, instead leaving it up to banks or returning to the gold standard in which the dollar's value would be tied to a specific weight of gold. I'm honestly surprised to see this in their document, because this is straight up libertarian theory. So I guess we still have some influence over these people. That's spot on. Lastly, they say that Project 2025 emphasizes opposing China, naturally. It describes China as a totalitarian enemy of the United States and directs the U.S. to pull out of international organizations when they don't serve the administration's interests, including the World Health Organization and various UN agencies. I don't mind that last bit at all. I think that the, Cold War we're amping up with China is largely misguided and probably going to be disastrous. I do understand concerns people have with China. I think they would be better addressed by creating more freedom in our markets. I don't know, reducing regulations, making it cheaper for things to be made here, making it easier to hire Americans. So I'm very careful around anybody or any entity that's like hyping up tensions with China, because I think it very easily could tip over and end up in a world war, which obviously we should want to avoid. But the specifics here aren't that concerning to me. And I absolutely think we should just leave most of these agencies and like global organizations to begin with. Lastly, they say Project 2025 does not seek to overturn the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but would make significant cuts to Medicaid and impose work requirements to receive coverage, as well as reform Medicare, including by making Medicare Advantage, a paid supplement to Medicare, the default option for patients. Good, needed, has to happen. If you don't like it, sorry, that's reality. Medicare and Medicaid are going bust. They are not working. They're bad systems. You should be concerned, especially if you're approaching retirement. Reforms have to be made. These are good ideas. Overall, this is a very disjointed document because, again, it is guided by the whims of populism, not actual principles. So some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's about limiting government, some of it is about expanding government, some of it is in direct contrast to each other, and that's because there's many different authors, as you'll note, that wrote different sections of it. So it's really not a very cohesive plan. Some of the good things likely have some underlying motivation, like I said, with Trump's own legal issues. Some of it seems politically impossible to actually achieve, like the language around sexuality. And some of it should concern you. Some of it is severely problematic, and we should be ready to fight against it. Some of it is stuff Biden is already doing, which I just find hilarious. I saw people like Elizabeth Warren, like, so revved up about JD Vance as the VP nomination and like popping off about him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, JD Vance economically is literally Elizabeth Warren with a beard. And so to me, watching as like somebody who really just hates both sides, it's really funny watching the hysteria build up around this right now. Some of this is far to the right. And again, some of this is common sense, okay? It's a mixed bag. And this is why it is so important for you to learn to think for yourself, to learn to evaluate policies individually versus based on what some party or some tribe you're in is telling you to feel about them. And it's really important, as best you can, to sidestep political hysteria and conspiracy theories, because mostly they are drastically overblown and they're going to keep your emotions up here. And that is just no way to live your life. And it's not going to make you very capable of calmly coming in and being able to participate in your political system like you need to as a wise person. Now, one last thing before I close, but I found this article with The Intercept really interesting. It seems that ever since this went into overdrive and the conversation around Project 2025 has created a lot of like blowback, that some of the criticism starting to work. It looks like some of the organizations that signed on have quietly removed their name. The Intercept says the more people learn about it, the more unpopular and politically toxic Project 2025 has proven to be. This has led the Trump and Vance campaign to attempt to distance itself from the effort. Former Trump advisor Stephen Miller, who is a quack, now says he had zero involvement with Project 2025, despite appearing in a promotional video for it. And just today, The Intercept discovered two more conservative groups that have quietly bowed out from the controversial 900-page manifesto, including a national anti-abortion organization. Miller's group, America First Legal Foundation, was one of the first organizations to jump ship from the Project 2025 Advisory Board. Last week, America First Legal asked to be removed from the Project 2025 Advisory Board webpage. The organization was part of Project 2025 since at least June of 2022, when the Heritage Foundation first announced the advisory board's formation. America First legal staff were deeply involved in writing and editing the Project 2025 playbook. Its vice president and general counsel, Gene Hamilton, drafted an entire chapter about the Justice Department, which proposes launching a campaign to criminalize mailing abortion pills. In a footnote, Hamilton thanked the staff at America First Legal Foundation, who he wrote deserve special mention for their assistance while juggling other responsibilities. As of Tuesday afternoon, Americans United for Life, an anti-abortion group, and the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a Michigan think tank, were among the more than 100 groups listed on the Project 2025 website as part of its advisory board. By Wednesday, Americans United for Life and the Mackinac Center had vanished. Both organizations were relatively recent additions to the Project 2025 coalition. The Heritage Foundation announced they had joined in February 2024, several months after the massive playbook was released. Neither organization would elaborate as to why it had joined the Project 2025 board in the first place or why it was exiting now. A spokesperson said the Mackinac Center had, quote, offered a few recommendations on energy and labor issues to Project 2025, but that Project 2025 contains some ideas we do not endorse and others outside of our scope. So, as I suspected, some of these groups signed on without fully signing on to the entire document, which I think should just make you far less concerned in general. Secondarily, it seems like democracy is working just fine to me, right? This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to debate ideas in the public sphere, and we're supposed to decide what's good, what's bad, what has merit, what doesn't. And that kind of public pressure does ultimately not only impact lawmakers and the decisions that they make, it also impacts these groups that are depending on donations and staying in good favor with their bases to act accordingly as well. So I think it's a great thing to see people waking up and recognizing, like, whoops, didn't mean to sign my name to all this. Let me back away, okay? So there you have it. That's my general breakdown of Project 2025. Like I said, I think you need to always be on guard and ready to work against bad ideas. And I, like Frederick Douglass, have always said that I will align with anybody to do good and no one to do bad. So for the areas where I align with the Heritage Foundation, while I dislike a lot of what they're doing and many of the people in their leadership, I'll lend my full support to things like school choice and lowering the tax rate or fixing the tax code. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. Let me know your thoughts. Drop me a comment. Can't wait to hear from you. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. And until next week, stay based.